The fat frog let out a croak and went splashing into the bog. Aenir cast his net just an instant too late and drew it back, empty except for a stick tangled in moss. "Damn it!" he cursed, pulling the muck from his net. His companion, Silas, spat from atop his horse onto the sodden ground of the swamp.
"Get on! We've no time for this!"
Silas Dollister did not look quite so forceful when he was not wearing his armor. His body somehow looked more slouched while not donned in mail, and his face was far less imposing without a helm to balance out his puffy cheeks. Aenir had come without his armor as well. If anyone was to spot them out here in the West Wink swamp, they would only see two common men, not two guardsmen. There was a third man, unconscious and covered in a sack, slumped over Silas's horse.
"I must get him!"
Aenir folded his net and walked back to his horse, a stringy old mare named Martha.
"Frogs are too fast and too slippery for your bumbling."
Silas scowled at his comrade.
"I've caught lots of them."
Aenir put his net back into his saddlebag and drew his furs about his shoulders once again. The month of Singing Ghost was quickly descending over the kingdom of Verland, and this year its song was a chilling one.
"Annie, you shit at frogging, you shit at fishing, and we've no time to waste."
Silas's voice strained with agitation.
"If you ever tasted my frog legs and sweet cream, you'd be down there in the mud with me."
Aenir mounted up and pulled his furs even tighter. It was his face that suffered in the nipping air most of all. He had been trying to grow a thick beard for over a year now, but the facial hair was too sparse and too stubborn.
"How can you think about eating at a time like this?"
Silas's stomach had been in knots since the prior night. Aenir scratched at his neck.
"Anything to take my mind off of this."
He looked at the man wrapped in sackcloth and slung over Silas's horse.
"It seems like a dead body,"
thought the unarmored guardsman.
"Is he still breathing in there?"
He watched for signs of the man's torso rising with breath. The night before, there had been a gala at the local lord's manor. While Aenir and Silas had not been assigned to guard duty, they had worked out a deal with two of the men who were, guardsmen who much preferred to rather spend the night at the brothel house instead. Silas had intentions for Lord Corin, who had committed unforgivable offenses. Corin was actually the brother of Lord Riley, the local lord of their town, Scaronagira. As such, none was certain if Corin was a true lord in title, or if he merely touted it as an affectation. Anywise, as the feasting and merrymaking drew late into the black hours of the night, the revelers had turned ever more drunken. Silas and Aenir slipped Lord Corin a heavy dosage of poison. Once the man fell into a senseless slumber, they carried him out back of the manor. By light of a lantern, Silas bound this man he so hated, covered him in a feed sack, and laid him across his horse. Leaving the crackling hearth and giddy laughter at their backs, the two men had worked their way southward, into the West Wink swamp, where Corin was to meet his terrible doom.
"I almost pity the man."
Aenir felt a tiny prickle in his belly, a pang of guilt and mercy that lasted no longer than a passing autumn gust.
"He's going to be one sorry scab when he wakes."
As if in reaction to the insult, the unconscious Lord Corin released a stream of urine down the haunch of Silas's steed. Chuckled Silas.
He's pussing himself already.
The two men had a laugh, then continued on their way. The morning sun was casting pink upon the gray-brown of the swamp. In this area, well removed from any sort of footpath, the bogs grew wider and deeper. The rushes stretched taller and spinier, and the trees hung with patches of off-colored moss. Banks of mist drifted about the lower pools where ducks taunted one another with their calls. A swarm of gnats pestered the rump of Silas's animal, which now reeked of Corin's piss. Once Silas was satisfied with the distance they had covered, he halted his horse near a tall tree.
This should do.
Aenir looked about. Muck and marshy vegetation riddled the area.
This seems good to me.
It could have been anywhere in the swamp. He could scarcely see 100 feet in any direction, due to the thick plant life and the uneven slopes of the earth. The guardsmen lifted Corin off the horse and onto the ground. They removed the sack that had covered him, then propped his back against the base of the tree. He was a portly man, whose chin melted into his neck, and he wore garments dyed in deep colors of blue and red. Silas took a long section of rope from his bag. With practiced hands, he began forming a slipknot.
I hope you like your new necklace, you sorry shit.
He spat on the slumbering nobleman. The spittle struck the man's face and mixed with the drool seeping out from between his slack lips.
I think I need a good piss myself,
said Aenir. He stepped over and savored a long, steaming shower on the Lord's face. When he was through, he looked over to Silas to find him frowning.
What? You don't think it's funny? He deserves worse than that.
Silas ground his teeth.
Well, he's getting worse than that, now isn't he? Yes, though it's going to be too quick. He had my Millie all night long. He fucked her every which way for hours. When she cried for him to stop, he bait her into silence, then kept on going.
Silas rubbed his puffy cheeks, then spat again.
I ought to give him more than a merciful kill. Right you are, but...
Aenir hesitated. He had never seen his comrade so full of hatred.
You said yourself we've little time. I need to be back before anyone realizes I was gone.
Silas mumbled something under his breath and secured the final pass of the slipknot. He walked up to the piss-reeking lord.
Wake up, you shit!
He tossed the slack end of the rope around a high and sturdy branch. But at the moment he began to slip the noose around Corin's neck, a voice came from the brush.
Oh no, that won't do. Who said that?
Silas startled.
If you don't want anyone to find the body, you're going to have to cut him up.
Aenir drew his dirk from his belt.
Show yourself.
Heh heh heh. The voice gave a simple laugh.
Cut him into pieces and toss them into the bogs. He'll be well eaten before anyone has a chance of finding him. We don't have butcher's cleavers, retorted Silas. And even if we did, we don't have that amount of time.
And we're not heading back, covered in blood, added Aenir.
It's going to be enough cleaning off the mud. Have it your way then, but when a search party finds his half-rotted corpse a moon from now, you're both going to be in some real trouble.
The voice seemed to be coming from a scraggly alder tree on the grassy ridge above them.
If they find him.
Silas huffed and slid the noose over Corin's head.
Oh, they will find him,
said the voice.
How? You intend to sell someone?
Aenir took a step toward the ridge, dirk in hand.
I could climb up there in a blink and pluck this rogue out by his ear. No? Well, not unless it's for the right price. Craven bastard!
Aenir darted for the ridge. The mucky surface did not support well his heavy leathern boots, and he found himself slipping and huffing, unable to ascend quite as he wished.
Bastard, perhaps, but craven, not truly.
At this, the man peeked his head out from between the branches of crisping leaves. He was gaunt and long of nose, and his clothing was that of an unwashed peasant.
There's another way, however. Not a craven? Then come down here and look me in the eye.
Aenir pointed toward the muddy ground with his dagger. As strong as his words were, his breath-sapped lungs left his voice weak.
Just don't start wheezing,
he hoped to himself. As a child, he would wheeze and cough whenever he tried to run and play with the other children. They had shamed him to no end because of this.
What's this other way?
Silas called up to the man in the alder. At his feet, Lord Corin began to sputter and mumble.
It seems your drunken friend is coming too.
The gaunt man gave a grin that missed a front tooth.
Are you certain his bindings are on tight?
Aenir glanced at the cords tied around the lord's wrists and ankles.
They're fine,
his companion replied.
Let's have this scub awake now then. But he'll hear the plan,
protested the man in the tree.
Would you throw yourself out of that damn tree?
Silas grimaced up toward the alder on the ridge.
I've got my own plan, and it ends with this bag of shit dangling by his throat. Have it your way, Silas.
The long-nosed one faded back among the foliage.
What did you say?
The guardsman dropped the rope.
How do you know my name?
Aenir's heart thumped within his chest.
Does he know my name as well?
He did not seem to recognize this stranger. Not that he could recall, anyhow.
I'll lend it, easy as any other. How? From who? Who are ye? Shall I answer all your questions with questions?
Silas drew his own dirk, its blade tinged with rust, but it could do its job all the same.
You come down here, right now. If you don't, I'm going to be killing 2 men this morning.
The shadow within the leaves and branches hooted softly. Oh,
how quickly you become such a monster. But you don't know what you're saying, and you don't even know what you're doing.
Silas looked at Aenir.
You take the left, I'll take the right. Let's skin this tree cat.
The 2 men set to climbing the ridge. The slope was steep and soft of grip. As they struggled to ascend, Lord Corin let out a groan. He grunted.
What is this?
Aenir let go of the root cluster he had been trying to use.
Silas,
he urged his comrade. His voice made a slight wheeze.
He's awake. What is this?
The hog-faced Corin gasped in horror at his situation. His bloodshot eyes looked over his bindings, his captors, his surroundings, the noisome swamp. He pulled at the noose around his neck, struggling without dexterity or range of motion.
Stop that!
Aenir produced his dirk and pointed it at the Lord's eye. He felt a cough itching at his chest, but he held it back. Silas quit the slope as well. He too came over to the hanging tree with his dagger in hand.
It's time to pay the pig, you shit!
He swatted the nobleman with the flat of his blade. This left a welt upon the man's plump cheek.
No!
Shrieked the lord.
I didn't do anything! I didn't do anything!
Look at me!
Shouted Silas.
You probably don't even know my name, but you know my wife's name, Millie.
What? I don't know what you're talking about!
Shut your shit-eating mouth!
Silas struck the man again. This time, a line of crimson split from his lip and dribbled down his chin.
Millie, I said. She works in the kitchen at your brother's manor. I'm sure you remember her very well. She didn't come home one night about a half moon ago. I know what you did. She's not your whore to do with as you please. She's not yours at all. I guard that manor, whilst you and your brother and your clown-faced friends scribble official-looking papers and drink fancy wines. You should have known better than to stick your cook where it didn't belong. The hands that guard you can just as easily tear your throat out.
Aenir noticed Silas was shaking, and a vein at his temple was throbbing.
You're wrong,
whimpered Lord Corin.
I didn't touch your wife. I've no idea what you're even talking about.
Liar!
Screamed Silas.
No!
Corin shook his head back and forth.
No. I didn't touch your wife. I've never touched any of the kitchen women.
For a moment, Aenir could not help but wonder if the Lord was telling the truth.
What if he is telling us true? What if Millie was the liar?
He did not speak his misgivings aloud.
Who's the liar and who's the truth-teller?
The man up on the ridge called down.
We're in too deep to worry about all that now. He's the liar.
Silas poked the nobleman with his dirk. The man shrieked as it pricked a bloody hole in his doublet. Corin's breath heaved.
I'm not lying! I didn't do anything! Oh, Lord above, why is this happening to me?
Up he goes, declared Silas. Lend me a hand. No?
Aenir remembered all the things Silas had said he was going to do to Lord Corin once he regained consciousness. Now that they were in the mess of it all, a certain chaos was scattering the moment.
Yes, now!
Silas took hold of the rope hanging from the other side of the tree branch. Aenir sheathed his dirk and wrapped a section of the rope in his hands, just behind his ally. Lord Corin was sobbing and pleading for his life. Most of what he said came out as half-pronounced blubbering.
Pathetic!
Silas spat into the weeds and mud. Indeed, it was the most pathetic thing Aenir had ever seen.
Pull!
Commanded Silas. The men yanked the rope, forcing into action all the strength of their hands and arms and backs. Corin lifted up into a near-standing position. His eyes bulged wildly, and he scraped ineffectively at the noose with his tied-up hands. He choked and hacked, but still was managing to draw slow, ragged breaths by propping himself part way against the trunk of the large tree. Aenir felt a ringing sensation within his lungs.
He weighs too much,
he panted out.
Pull harder!
Silas's face was turning red, and the vein in his temple was throbbing. Aenir about-faced, dug his boots into the ground, and hauled at the rope. He labored as he could, until he could no more. Wheezing and coughing, he slumped onto his hands and knees.
Damn ye!
Silas cursed. Lord Corin was hacking in his own sort of way, and wailing between gasps.
It appears the fat man doesn't want to go up,
called the stranger on the ridge. He poked his bony face out from behind the orange and brown leaves once again.
Perhaps he's innocent after all. Piss off! Shouted Silas. That seems to be more your friend's specialty, the man grinned. I'm really not sure what else he's even good for. I'd be good at sticking my dagger in your belly, thought Aenir. He was struggling to gain control over his wheezing breath. Silas slung a dirt clod at the man up in the alder. It burst upon the limb next to his face. Cursing, the guardsman went to his horse. He barked a command and led the beast under the tree, where Corin was still begging for his life.
Please, this is all a mistake. I won't tell anyone. Just let me go, please, please.
Silas glared at the nobleman.
You should have considered this before you laid hands on my wife.
I swear I didn't.
Before he could finish his promise, Silas kicked the man square in the face. He howled and collapsed over, pressing his corded hands against his nose and mouth.
You're not much in the mood to listen today, are you, Silas?
The stranger's voice sounded ever more a mockery for such a mad circumstance. Silas did not respond. He fastened the loose end of the rope around his horse, then mounted up.
No, no, no.
Lord Corin was clutching his bloodied face.
I'm going to kill him with my own hands.
Aenir remembered his comrade swearing on more than one occasion. He sucked in a deep breath, but still felt the sappy sting at the bottom of his lungs.
Just get it over with,
he wheezed. Silas shouted and smacked his mount's haunch. The horse jolted forward until the rope went taut. The nobleman rose up onto the tips of his toes, wobbling and spinning by the rope tight at his neck. He made a retching sound, and his whole face went a shade of deep pink. The horse dug at the sodden ground, its hooves carved gashes into the mud, trying to go forward. Silas whipped at the animal, and it struggled all the more. There was a cracking sound, and the branch from which Corin was teetering came falling down. The heavy limb struck the nobleman on his right shoulder. Aenir heard the man's bones breaking. The lord fell to the ground, wailing and shuddering. Silas's horse dragged ahead until he shouted for it to halt.
Father shits!
He cursed once and again. With his dirk in hand, he leapt down off his mount. His eyes were wild with rage.
Hold his hands!
He ordered his comrade. Aenir pulled back Corin's hands. One arm was completely limp.
Burn in the hell!
Silas drove his blade into the nobleman's chest. After 3 stabs, he made his way to Corin's heart. And they watched his wretched, hacking death.
At last, the deed is done.
The stranger sounded somber this time.
What shall you do with the body? Hide it alongside yours, Silas snapped. Seeing as how I'm not an old fat man whom you drugged, I can't feel too afraid.
Aenir looked at the man in the tree and said,
Give us your name. I'll hear your advice and stay my companion's threats, but tell us who you are. Give me your name first, or shall I call you Wheezy? How did he know that?
Aenir hated that name. While growing up, nearly every kid on the street had mocked him with the name Wheezy.
Aenir's my name, he proclaimed.
It was a fine name, true and masculine.
Aenir. Very good then. You may call me Jace. He's dead.
Silas was staring at the corpse lying in the mud.
I killed him, Millie. That he is. Dead and done.
Jace gave a whistle through the gap where his tooth used to be.
But Dead men still have their needs. We could put rocks in his clothes and throw him into a bog.
Aenir thought it was as good an idea as any.
Who could ever find a single corpse at the bottom of a bog out here? There is a better way, stated Jace. Faster, easier, and I can assure you, no one will ever find the body.
Silas only grunted in reply.
Well, tell us,
said Aenir.
I know of a pit not far from here. Very close, in fact. All you have to do is toss the fat man's body down, down, down. No one will ever be able to find him there. Very close.
Aenir knew they had already run out of time. They should be heading back.
Well, that sounds good, doesn't it, Silas? It sounds...
Silas had a distant look in his eyes.
It sounds to be a better option. Yes. Just make me down that way.
Jace gestured with the point of his finger and disappeared back among the shadows and autumnal foliage.
This may well turn out in the end.
Aenir was feeling a bit of relief.
Let's just get this Slim out of the way and we'll drag the old cord into his grave.
Silas gave a slow nod and went to pulling the fallen branch aside. The two guardsmen then mounted up and moved ahead. They went a ways to where the ground rose up and met the far side of the ridge. At the round of its crest, they saw a far-stretching swampland of thickets and hummocks and sedge clusters, all with muddled bogs in between.
What if he was telling the truth?
Silas put the question out into the rank air.
No,
responded Aenir.
He was lying to save his life. All the cravens do that.
There was a silent pause before Jace's voice came calling,
Down here!
The men squinched their eyes, scanning the area. They caught sight of Jace waving to them. He was situated up in another tree. This one stood at the end of a muddy basin. Aenir gave his comrade's shoulder a little slap.
It's almost over. I didn't trust this man. How did he know my name? I don't know. He's not from Skeranagira, though. We have never seen him around before. We need to keep our eyes open, Aenir. And we need to make sure he's going to stay quiet. I don't care what we have to do. But what happens today does not leave the swamps.
Aenir nodded.
I agree. Are you coming?
Jace's voice echoed up from the lower swath. The two men nudged their horses forward, down the far side of the crest. Into the mucky ground they went, with dead Corin flopping behind them. The mounts struggled to walk through the mud and stagnant puddles at the hollow of this lower plot.
It's just over here,
Jace grinned.
The damned horses can hardly walk in the mud.
Aenir looked at the sopping tracks they were leaving behind. Silas's horse was a few paces back, dragging the corpse by the rope around his neck. When they reached the center of the basin, their horses could go no farther. Their legs stuttered and strained, unable to move.
You're gonna have to go on foot.
Jace was sitting on a long tree limb overlooking the soggy patch below.
This mud's impossible,
Aenir grumbled.
The horses are stuck. The horses can wait. Bring the body over here. The pit is just this way. I don't see it.
Silas's eyes were searching all over the sludge.
Yes, it's hard to see from down there, but I can see it perfectly well from where I'm sitting.
One of the horses whickered.
Let's be done with this.
Aenir was tired and hungry, and his nerves were exhausted. He came down into the mud. The cold wetness seeped into his boots. Silas dismounted as well. The two of them worked the noose from Corin's neck. The dead man looked nothing like himself. Bloated and caked in mud, he seemed more like a toad. They toiled to drag the corpse ahead through the clinging muck.
Annie, I'm stuck.
Silas was trying to lift his foot out of the shin-deep mud.
We have to go back.
Aenir wished he could protest, but he had not the spirit. When he tried to turn back, he found himself stuck as well.
This damned mud!
The pair struggled all the more. It was no use.
This was a terrible idea!
Shouted Silas. Jace spoke back.
I think not. I made it across fine and well.
Aenir felt his heart beginning to race.
I have to get out of here.
He reached down into the mud and worked at his left boot. He pulled at the lacings until his foot came free. His bare skin touched the sopping sludge when he planted the step behind himself. Then he freed his other foot. When he tried to swivel and face around, he lost his balance and fell sidelong.
Aenir!
Silas's voice sounded grim. Aenir pushed against the wetness until he could see his comrade.
Aenir, I'm sinking!
The mud was up to Silas's knees.
We have to get out!
Aenir rasped. But the more he struggled, the more he found himself descending into the muck.
Jace, help us!
Yelled Silas.
I am helping you,
he replied simply.
Damn you! Get the rope from my horse!
Oh, I much prefer the view from up here.
You twisted bastard! You let us here! Now get us out!
Spittle flew from Silas's mouth as he shouted.
I'm twisted. You're the murderer. It was vengeance! He raped my wife! A man has a right to his vengeance! Oh, yes. The rights your gods so proudly bestow upon you.
Jace made a snort.
Tell me, what gods are there in the swamps? Where are the temples and idols? I see none.
The horses whined and shook their heads, straining to pull their hooves free. Silas was now waist deep in the mud.
The gods are still here!
I think not.
That is precisely why you came out here, isn't it? To hide your dark deeds from the eyes of the men and the divine. And now that you have what you've sought, you find it's not as you expected. Do you think you could just retain all your rights and safeties while taking advantage of the cruelty of the wilds?
Jace loosed a great laugh. Aenir wanted to shout, but his lungs were wheezing even worse than before. A sickening dread welled in his belly and crawled out across his skin. He felt the wet of the swamp touch his cheek.
What do you want?
Shouted Silas.
Why are you doing this? Don't you sound like someone we knew until just recently?
Jace snickered.
Corin knew what he did!
Silas's arms were outstretched, with the muck rising up to his chest. Jace seemed to ponder the thought.
I suppose none of us will ever truly know.
Aenir tried to keep his lips sealed, but his chest was heaving too greatly for that. He tasted the gritty and earthen flavor of the mud. Just before he went under, he heard Silas scream.
How much time has passed? Am I dead?
Aenir realized he was having thoughts. He could not move, and all was dark.
Is this the underworld?
He felt his eyes open, but he saw naught but blackness.
Am I breathing?
He listened and heard breath.
Yes, I'm breathing.
He heard his own breath, and he smelled an old, moldering odor.
Am I still alive?
He seemed to be alive, after all. Slowly, faint sensations came to him. He felt the hardness of stone upon which he was lying. He felt a twitch in his fingers, and his limbs wanted to move. After an unknown length of time, he became aware of sounds nearby. There were steps and quiet voices, though muted as through a door. The movement came closer. Then the darkness broke and was lifted away. Aenir found that he was lying in a sarcophagus, and a group of people were taking the lid off. They set it aside and peered down at him with white gray eyes. Their skin was pale and blotched. A couple of them looked absolutely wretched, as though diseased and boil-ridden. Blood smeared their lips, and there was hunger in their gazes.
"Who's awake?"
said a man in the group.
This happened with another one not 3 days ago,
said a woman. Aenir's arms trembled. He wanted to move. He wanted to spring from where he lay.
Can you speak?
Asked a man with a horrid complexion of mottled tans, greens, and grays. There was a moment of silence, except for a sucking sound emanating from somewhere not far off.
What happened with the other one who woke up?
A man asked the woman.
We drained him and sold the body to the necromancer.
I'm hungry. Let's do the same with him.
We should wait and speak with Blasafil. This should not be happening, and he needs to know about it.
It's only 2. He won't even notice.
Yes, it's about 2 common scabs, and I'm famished. There are plenty of others ready. Have them instead.
But it's been so long since I got good and full. This scab don't look like no one important.
Aenir lay there, unable to move, listening to the strangers debating over oddities that he knew not.
Don't kill me,
he tried to say.
Look, his lips are moving.
I'm gonna drain him dry. Ease off, Veligan. You'll do no such thing.
What if I help him? You're not going to stop us both.
I will. I'll have you both burned, and the rest of you sewered bastards along with you.
Peace and wind! All of you, stop. Let's just have our drink, then move along. We'll speak with Blasafil once he comes back.
The one woman lifted Aenir's arm in her clammy hands. He saw a series of bite marks along his arm in various stages of healing, and he noticed how thin he had become. She opened her mouth and bit into a section of unblemished skin. Others followed in suit, sinking their teeth into his naked flesh and drawing at the lifeblood of his body. When they were done, Aenir felt his head swirling. They lowered the lid back onto the sarcophagus and left him once more sealed away in darkness.